The Orekhovskaya OCG is one of the most notorious and powerful groups in the post-Soviet space. Some gangs managed to survive the 1990s, but the Orekhovs did not. Rapid rise and fall, this was typical for many gangsters in those years. Interestingly, but some aspects of this organized crime group are reflected in popular culture. For example, the famous TV series Brigade. Here, the history of the OCG is taken as the basis of the plot. And here in the sitcom Universe, the character Sylvester Andreyevich Sergeyev is clearly an allusion to the leader of the Orekhovsky, who had the nickname Sylvester. How did an organized crime group come into being? Sergei Timofeyev, who was born in the Novgorod village of Klin and had just served in the army, moved to Moscow. Here, he settled in Orekhovo-Borisovo, a large housing estate in the capital. In his village, the guy was a tractor driver, but he loved sports and even wanted to do it professionally and become famous. In Moscow at that time, the martial art of karate was gaining popularity. Sergei became an instructor and for a long time trained student. The guy's expectations were not confirmed and he could not reach great heights in the sport, especially since the salary was very small and soon karate in general was banned in the USSR. Training now became illegal. Timofeyev got married and had a child. Things got worse with money. Sergei started working as a taxi driver, but, as he himself admitted, it did not bring much money. In the mid-80s, he became friends with the local scum, guys aged 18 to 25. Many of them were his former students. They showed Sergei what thievery was. For Sergei, this occupation became profitable. On the surface, it looked innocent. It looked like a game, but it brought in a lot of money. The financial problems were over. Sergei Timofeyev soon became the leader of a new group. He subsequently took control and protection of all the thieves in his residential area. The gang quickly gained respect in Moscow. It began to be reckoned with, feared and respected. At first, the gangsters called Sergei simply Ivanich, and then Sylvester. In honor of the actor Sylvester Stallone, Sergei also had a well-developed musculature. Naturally, the establishment of power in Orekhovo-Borisov was a very difficult matter, and there were constant conflicts. The only competitors of the Orekhovskys were various OCGs from the Caucasus. The conflict started unexpectedly. The Azerbaijanis decided to play a game of thimbles, which Timofeyev was in favor of, and, naturally, lost. They realized that they had been cheated and refused to pay the money, resulting in a mass brawl. One of the Caucasians had his skull fractured as a result of the fight. The Azerbaijanis lost, but they were angry and wanted revenge. But literally, on the same day, they managed to gather about 100 people and went looking for Sylvester. They found him, but he managed to escape. He ran to the courtyard where the local police station was located. Then the Caucasians simply smashed up his car. Since that time, 1988, a long confrontation between the Caucasian OCGs and the Orekhovsky OCGs began, which led to the deaths of many hundreds of people. Sylvester's gang was also joined by an equally well-known OCG, the Solntsevskaya OCG. The alliance did not last long, but it allowed Sergei Timofeyev to greatly expand the boundaries of his influence. Together with other members of the group, he now covered petrol stations, retail outlets, and many businessmen. In 1989, Timofeyev and his gang began to pressure Vadim Rosenbaum, a businessman, to also pay them money. As a result of the conflict, the Solntsevsky leaders and Timofeyev himself were arrested on charges of extortion. But only Sylvester served 3 years in prison, as he took all the blame. The golden years of the OCG. Sylvester was released on parole in 1991. During the absence of the leader, the Orekhovskys were able to gain even more influence and expanded the scope of their activities. Now the group was no longer engaged in thimbles, but moved on to bigger cases, robbed lorries, truckers, took away goods and resold them. Timofeyev, after his time in prison, was engaged in quite legal entrepreneurship. He began to acquire commercial firms, shops, restaurants, banks. Sylvester tried to get into the oil industry. He was also engaged in precious metals, stones, car business, real estate. By the way, he did not recognize thieves' notions, and even more so, did not burn with the desire to crown himself. He showed with all his appearance that he was an honest businessman. Sylvester's influence was so great that even law enforcement agencies were afraid to touch him. But from the gangster business is nowhere to go, and periodically there were clashes with competitors and even tougher than before. But Sylvester now became very careful, and even contract killings he began to trust only to allies. For example, the Medvedkovo or Kurgan groups. But the competitors also did not sleep and even managed to kill Alexander Bezubkin, who was Timofeyev's deputy at the time. Bezubkin got into a car, started it, and was blown up. In 1993, Sylvester had a conflict with the Bauman Group. The official cause of the conflict was the nightclub Arlecchino. But, as they say, the clashes began after the Baumansky became allies of the Caucasians. The latter were, and still are, terrible enemies of the Orekhovsky. Allies of the Orekhovskaya OCG are also involved in gang warfare. The killer Sasha Macedonsky, Alexander Solonik, from the Kurgan group killed the head of the Bauman group, Globus Valery Dlugach. Later, Solonik also killed Globus deputy Vladislav Vaner. In 1994, Sylvester had a conflict with Otari Kvantrishvili. The latter was not only an authoritative bandit, but also a prominent politician and businessman. The dispute arose over an oil refinery in Tuapse. As a result, Kvantrishvili was killed. The murder was solved only in 2006. It turned out that Sylvester ordered Otari Medvedkovskaya group. The executor was the famous Lesha Soldat. Soon Sylvester became a dollar billionaire and one of the key people in the country. Here, not only law enforcers, even the special services were afraid to dig for him. Now, Timofeyev had new competitors, like Berezovsky, who was assassinated in 1994. Soon an attack on Sylvester was organized, and a successful one at that. Timofeyev's Mercedes was blown up and he was killed. The murder is still unsolved. Sylvester had a lot of enemies. The end of the gang. After Timofeyev's murder, the Orekhovskaya OCG broke up into many small gangs. Sergei Buterin became the leader of the most influential one. Internecine squabbles began. There was continuation of old conflicts. Within a few years, many Orekhovsky authorities were killed, including Dragan, Sergei Volodin, Uzbek Jr., Alexander Kleshchenko, Kultik, Sergei Ananievsky. In 1996, one of Sylvester's cronies, Dvochnik, was shot dead. And before that, he had already been tried to be killed twice. And these are only the most notable faces in the Orekhovskaya OCG. Many times, more ordinary members of the group were killed. In 3 years alone, 1995 to 1998, about 150 people were killed. Sergei Buterin had a slightly different fate. He faked his death and went to Spain. He lived happily for a few years, and then was arrested by the Spanish authorities and received a sentence of 8.5 years for weapons possession. After his release, he was handed over to Russian law enforcement and received a life sentence. Today, there are about 50 members of the gang. These are ordinary gangsters and authorities. From time to time, news that someone from the Orekhovsky gang has been jailed pops up. Moreover, the last verdict was announced relatively recently, in 2020. And it is also very interesting. Where did Sylvester's money go? Who exactly stole this fat piece of the pie and is still at large?